the people. We are here for Women's Writers Fest for the month of November, and our first panel today is titled Indian Man in the Me Too Era. We have with us a brilliant set of panelists and moderator. First up, we have Prachi Gangwani. Prachi is a Delhi-based writer and content creator. She talks about relationships, sexuality, gender, culture, and wellness. She runs a digital publication by the name of Keeping Zen and is also the content head at Human Edge Enterprises. She's the author of the book Dear Men, Masculinity and Modern Love in Me Too Era, which is what we are going to discuss here. We also have with us Tanya Appachu, who is a lawyer and ex-Big Four tax consultant and turned digital content creator. She makes educative and entertaining bite-sized videos on women's rights and laws on her Instagram handle, Your Insta Lawyer. Her aim is to make people aware and empowered through her content. In conversation with them, we have Shunali Khullar Shroff. Sonali is the best-selling author of Love in the Time of Affluenza and Battle Hymn of a Bewildered Mother. She writes on travel, modern Indian love, culture, and feminism for a host of publications. I welcome all three of you to She the People's Women's Writers Fest, and thank you all for taking this time and joining us in this our endeavor. And without wasting much time, I'll hand over the session for moderation to Shunali.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Prachi,
Thank
on
you
your
so
book.
much.
It's an
Thank
excellent endeavor towards a very difficult task called understanding men, especially understanding Indian men. So thanks for taking that on behalf of India's female population.
Thank you.
So I think let's just start by talking a little about your book and what you have set out to do with this.
Sure. So, the book actually came about when I was working at IDEVA, which is a women's only lifestyle publication. I was handling the relationships and sex section for them. And part of my job included talking to women about their experiences with dating and sex and marriage, etc. And I realized that there are patterns in women's experiences, right? There are patterns in the kind of behavior that men have towards women. And I got very curious. I wanted to know, what are the men thinking? I wanted to know if there are any patterns in, the way men think about relationships or think about dating or think about women. So that's how it all started. I started interviewing men. I started talking to men. And I did that for 2 or 3 years, close to 3 years. And all of that has culminated into this book. The aim of the book really is to encourage conversations between men and women. I don't think we do that enough. I think as women, we are very vocal about our experiences, but we talk amongst ourselves. We talk to each other about the men in our lives. And I don't know how much authentic, intimate conversation happens between men and women. So the aim of the book really is to bring to surface the other side, and like you said, to try to understand what young urban Indian men are going through and what they think about relationships and sexuality and women.
Sure. So before I, start discussing Me Too, because it really was a decisive landmark moment when it comes to, women being able to speak up. And I think even Tanya will agree that it has played some role in giving us all a voice. And I mean, we'll get to the legal angle of that a little later. But what I do want to ask you is that do men and women want the same thing really from each other when it comes to modern love?
I would say yes. I think love is a very human need, and companionship and partnership is a human need. It's not a gender-based need. So men, women, everyone wants harmonious relationships. That's really what all of us want. But what I've learned is that our definition, and what it looks like, what a harmonious relationship and companionship and partnership looks like to men and women is slightly different. And also their ways of getting there are different. But to answer your question, I do think that everybody wants the same thing, which is to love and to be loved.
So, was this a realization you arrived upon after you had gone through your fairly exhaustive sample size of men, urban Indian men? Or, as a psychologist, you've already, I mean, this is an insight you've gained post this book, or have you always held on to this belief and it's only confirmed it?
The latter. I've always held this belief, but I think definitely talking to men did confirm it. Talking to men actually taught me that uh, they just reach it differently, they think of it differently. But I've always believed that everybody just wants the same thing, which is to love and be loved.
So now to the most important conversation that invariably creeps up. Into everything that women and men discuss, even today, 2-3 years after the entire Me Too wave rose its head and then sort of petered down, is that what has how has the urban Indian man reacted to and responded to the Me Too movement in India?
So, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there's really no generalization that I think we can make when it comes to this. The men that I have spoken to, their reactions and their perspective on Me Too has been along this spectrum. So, on the one hand, you have men who almost resent the movement
Hmm.
because they think that it's unfair to call out a man publicly, or it's unfair to bring up issues that happened in the past, etc. But then on the other hand, I've spoken to men who feel almost shocked and regretful and ashamed of the fact that they live in a society where women are treated this way, right? Or they're a part of this group of men where a lot of men treat women this way. So I think it's along the spectrum. It's very hard to make a generalization about this.
Tanya, I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about what has changed in urban India. I mean, Me Too was restricted to urban India, as we know. Women who had access to social media, it involved calling out of a lot of men who were in the public eye. But as a lawyer who, works towards educating women about their rights, what has changed in India after Me Too for both the genders? And we are, I mean, just for the sake of clarification, I think this conversation is going to be restricted to the two genders because your book is
Yeah,
about, heterosexual couples. So that's just a
absolutely.
disclaimer.
I
Yeah.
think I'd just like to add on to the conversation with the earlier question which Prachi was talking about. I think most men, after the Me Too movement, I have come across is they don't know what they've done wrong.
Hmm.
Most men feel that what has happened, or what the men who were accused of the Me Too movement during the Me Too movement, they feel that that's normal behavior. Like, it's not something different. I mean, was it wrong? That was the main question that people had. So I think the main uh, problem with men is they fail to differentiate consent. And I think consent became the main talking point after the Me Too movement. And if you see the laws, basically the law says that if there is no consent, that amounts to rape or sexual harassment. So even if you go to the court of law, you need to prove consent in court.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that became very mainstream. People started talking about consent. People started educating everybody what consent is, because that is something that Indian men or Indians don't even know about. If, for example, if I go to a pub and I just want to flirt with a guy, I want to have a drink and just have a flirtatious conversation, my flirting would always be considered as a invitation
Consent.
to sex. It would never be considered as just flirting. So
Yeah.
that education, I don't think we have. We of course have a platform now after the Me Too movement. So many women have come out public, spoken about the experiences, and that has really helped spark the conversation about consent. And people, I hope at least the urban India does understand a bit about what is consent, what is not consent. And a lot of men still ask me, how do I know when the woman is okay with something and when she's not? So that is the main question men do have, and I think that needs education, at sex education at, I mean, I don't mean, educating children about private
Sure.
parts and what belongs where, but actual real world sex education at a very young age in the families, and that would help. So I think the Me Too movement, first of all, validated a lot of women's feelings and experiences,
Mhm.
and it helped women understand that something that has happened with them is real. I mean,
Mhm.
a lot of people are even confused about. Okay, I had this bad experience. Is that right or is that wrong? I mean, legally, is that right or wrong? Can I actually do
We've never
something
had
about
conversations about that. You see,
it?
I
Yeah,
think it's been par for the course for women to always sort of deal with men,
yeah,
unsavory men also, and men they find attractive as well, because I think men have felt entitled for far too long, and we haven't really processed it, and we haven't been taught, not all of us, I would say, have been taught how to go about it. And even I think for a lot of women, consent is a gray area for them also.
yeah.
Do you agree,
It
Prachi?
is.
So I do agree with that definitely. And I think what Me Too movement also did is that it made us, all of us, men and women and everyone really, look back at our experiences and reevaluate them from this new lens of consent. I don't think women understand. Well, like you said, Tanya, Indians in general, I think we have a very abysmal understanding of consent. And Me Too definitely has opened that up for both women and men.
Yeah. So, Tanya, since I mean, I hope we'll have some some male viewers here. I wanted to ask you to clarify if implied consent is consent at all,
Not
and
at
can
all.
you take that with an example just to simplify it?
Yeah, like we just spoke, right? I mean, when I go to a pub, I probably would make eye contact with a guy, and I would. That may be an invitation to have a drink with me, maybe an invitation to have a conversation with me, maybe not an invitation to touch me or, take me to the bedroom or have sex with me. So that is the difference. I mean, implied consent is, it doesn't mean that just because I gave him come hither looks, that means I have given consent to sex. So even the law says that any sort of implied consent is not consent at all. Consent has to be clear, it has to be effective, it has to be loud, it has to have no questions asked, it has to be a very clear yes.
So, what is
So
the law that protects women when it comes to uh, sexual harassment outside of the workplace? I know we have Vishaka guidelines and all that. Can you just spell that law out and talk us through it a bit?
about the Vishaka guidelines, or
Laws in place which have been revised over the years for women who are sexually harassed, uh, women who are stalked, date not date rape, but where the consent is missing and still the person has gone ahead with some sort of intimate contact.
yeah. So basically, we have Section 375, which talks about rape. So any sort of sexual act, which it also includes even just touching your private parts. Earlier, it used to be only penetration, but now after the Nirbhaya case, the definition of rape has changed a lot, and now it can be even inserting anything into private parts, touching your private parts. So any form of physical sexual conduct which does not have a an explicit consent from the woman, that amounts to rape. So that is a law which protects most of the sexual encounters. Of course, this law for stalking is different. It's Section 354, where any person follows you continuously and tries to molest you. It's an umbrella of law. So all these protect women even outside of workplace. But like I said, very rarely is even women understand that something that's happening with them, they can actually go to the police station and file a police complaint. So
Right.
that is a different part of education that we need to do, that women do have rights and they do have a voice, they do have a remedy for whatever's going on with them. So that's something that needs to be spoken about too. But yeah.
So, Prachi, you've written extensively about how our culture normalizes toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
I think it'll be nice if you can talk a little bit about how to identify toxic masculinity for the sake of people who read your book. I don't think even men themselves are aware of the things that have been normalized, which actually are not okay.
Yeah.
Can you discuss that a little bit?
Sure. So I think, the term toxic masculinity is almost abused now, and we really use it just for any bad behavior that we see, at the hands of men. But that's not what it is. And that has also been my learning while working on this book, is that toxic masculinity is really about, something called the man box, which is a very rigid set of expectations that we have of men, or characteristics or attributes that we associate with men. And so it's things like, expecting men or raising young boys to suppress their emotions, saying things like boys don't cry. I think that is probably the most basic and the most relatable example or definition of toxic masculinity, is where you suppress the more feminine, softer, nurturing side of men. And what that does really is to men is that it leads to a ton of mental health issues. It leads to men not learning how to communicate effectively. Um, and it leads to high risk taking behavior. It leads to lesser comfort or lesser probability of men seeking help. It leads to, like, another very big part of toxic masculinity is the pressure to be the provider.
Hmm.
Men are raised to and expected to be the provider, and this is despite the fact that so many women are now financially independent, right? So many women are getting jobs, and we don't look for financial support from our partners.
Right.
Even so, this is this is the impact of the patriarchy or toxic masculinity on men, is that they feel they associate their sense of self or self-esteem so strongly with being a provider, that even if they have a partner who can provide, they still want to be the breadwinner, right? So these are kind of the aspects of toxic masculinity. It's not bad behavior, you know
No, it also spills into areas like a man, and a book is full of such examples. A man who is expected to conform to a certain image of himself as a sexual being. These are men who, are visiting prostitutes, who are indulging, like we said, in dangerous behavior even after being married, who are succumbing to pressure from other men to be a stud. Uh, and of course, then this does affect relationships, the relationships with their wives and girlfriends and so on and so forth. So, uh, you know, since there's been an awakening, right? I mean, as far as women are concerned, uh, we are slowly. I mean, at least my daughters have been more aware than say we were growing up. Uh, to understand that gender stereotypes need not be adhered to understand that this is just a social construct, and also to sort of understand that there's an unnecessary glorification of the concept of purity that women are expected to adhere to. I think women today don't get slut shamed easily. We've had to go through that. I think understanding that we all have a sexual agency. So all this has happened, right?
yeah
To the urban Indian woman at least. But men, even now, 3 years after Me Too and all these conversations started, are, as you said right at the beginning, Tanya said it, men are very confused.
yeah
Okay? There is no clarity. So I want to know who is speaking to men. I mean, I hope your book will be picked up by men and they'll read it and they won't feel emasculated when they hold the book like this. And, uh, who is talking to men? What the main change? I mean, we needed to know and stand up and speak for ourselves, but it takes two to tango. And when is that change going to happen? What do you see happening over there during your conversations with men?
Sure. I think that's a great question. Okay, I'm going to answer this in two parts. One is
Mhm.
that these conversations do not happen between men. Men between themselves, among themselves, don't talk about consent. They don't talk about relationships. They don't talk about masculinity, right? It is very true that the work that is being done in this space, where we're talking about masculinity, at least in India, there are more female voices than male voices questioning the man box or trying to redefine masculinity. Uh, I think men are learning a lot from the internet, from the kind of content that we are creating. I think that plays a huge role in at least starting these conversations. But I also think that it's up to us as women to educate men about the impact that they have in our lives, right? Like, and I mean good and bad. So, for example, if I go out and I get harassed, I should and I must come home and tell the men in my life that this happened to me, so that they know that this is the reality we live in. And then they are encouraged or forced to reflect on themselves, how they are around the women in their lives, how they are with the men in their lives who may be, a little sexist or misogynistic. Do they call out that behavior? But I think that has to start, unfortunately, with us talking about our experiences with the men in our lives very loudly and unabashedly and repeatedly.
Yes, I tend to agree with you there. You just brought up, we were, you've written somewhere in your book that rape or sexual violence and sexist jokes that you just brought up belong in the same spectrum. Can you elaborate that a little bit? Just so that men understand. You know, when I'm on chat groups with men, I read sexist jokes and my blood not just boils, it curdles up, okay, because it really upsets me. And I think men can't comprehend why we have become so touchy and so sensitive, okay? It's just a joke, but it is not just a joke. You normalize patriarchy, misogyny with all these jokes. So, can we talk about that statement of yours that these two belong in the same spectrum?
Sure. So it's actually based on a theory, or like research in psychology, which talks about everyday chauvinism or everyday utilitarian chauvinism, which is along the spectrum, along a spectrum, which starts with very like, uh, seemingly harmless behavior or behavior that can be passed off as harmless, which is jokes, right? Or sarcasm, or like just like just hushing the women in your life कि तुम्हें कुछ नहीं आता है, you don't know, like
Hmm.
why do you need to know about finances, right? So it starts with that, and then it goes all the way to rape and even murder, gender
Hmm.
based violence, etc.,
Hmm.
right? So this is all on a spectrum, and in the middle is domestic violence, things like stalking and harassment and workplace harassment, emotional abuse, etc. So if you really look at it, when you tell a woman, when you make jokes, when you make sexist jokes, you are telling a woman that her experience of all, of sexism doesn't matter, right? It's a laughing matter. I can just lighten it up with a joke. But you're dismissing that. You're dismissing her reality. You're dismissing all women's reality. Just the same way you rape a woman, right? You're dismissing her reality, you're dismissing her body, you're dismissing her autonomy. So the reason why we are so sensitive is because it dismisses our experiences as women.
Sure. Tanya, how has, in your understanding, because you run Insta Lawyer, yeah, Insta Lawyer, that's your handle?
Your
Uh,
install. Yes,
your Insta Lawyer. So,
yeah.
um, how has the digital space, uh, and not just legal interactions and people educating themselves on this, but even in terms of pursuing romance, how has that brought about a change in the perspectives of sexuality, relationships, and love among men and women?
I think today people have a platform. I mean, it's not internet is not the safest platform right now,
Hmm.
but it still is a platform for people to talk.
So earlier, maybe conversations used to happen in urban spaces, friends talking to other friends in coffee shops. But right now, we live in a world where, there are young girls and boys from small towns, from villages, all on one platform. I mean, Instagram has people from all over, any social media platform for that matter.
Right.
So when you are speaking on such a platform, you are actually reaching out to people from, you know, all stratas of the society. And I think that helps kind of validate people's experiences, because say an xyz girl sitting in a small town, she's gone through something, and she feels there's nobody to validate her feelings, because you know how our Indian families are. I mean, you can't really go out and speak to your own family about what's happened with you. So she sees something online, she sees, maybe a video or somebody's comment saying, "Oh, this happened with me too."
Hmm.
So just like how the Me Too movement happened. So I think the internet really gives that space for people to watch and say that, okay, something similar happened to me. I can do something about it. In a lot of my posts, not all my posts are very legal. I do also cover some social evils and social issues. So a lot of people are like, oh, I thought I was the only one who faced this, but I see in the comment section that a lot of people are facing it too. So I think that's the sort of validation that you give through any social media, and it does spark conversations. It gets people to think about what they're doing, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, people's actions. I'm sure even men. I do make a lot of content on women's rights, so, and I have at least like around 30% followers who are men. I'm sure they do watch it, and it does reflect on their behavior back home or in their workplace. So I think that's the kind of perspective any sort of I've seen even Prachi. She talks about relationships and dating, and she has these comments, questions that she asks, and people comment and talk about their real life experiences. So it's a way that somebody watching it or reading it is like, okay, this happened with somebody else, and it happened with me too. It's normal. I
Yeah.
can do something about it.
Right.
So that's the kind of platform I think. Personally, for me, that's what it provides, the internet, yeah, and the reach. I mean, the kind of people you reach out to. If
Sure.
I did something on ground, I could reach out to maybe 50 people, but when you're on the internet, you do reach out to a lot of
Indeed.
people. So, yeah.
Prachi, you've written a lot about dating apps, yeah, and there are all sorts of dating apps online right now. In my limited understanding of this, since I haven't participated um, and used a dating app ever since I'm married, it's very intriguing and fascinating. It's almost like I feel that this is something that a certain generation of women will never really understand, and it also does look attractive from the outside, at least. But is it really that attractive on the inside? When I'm sure you have clients you counsel and talk to, and you're definitely younger than me, so you're exposed to a wider set of women and men.
Sure. So, I met my husband on a dating app. So, yes, it does
Well
work
done.
for sure. Um, I think it is um, for a lot of people in urban India, it's really becoming the primary way that you meet people, that you want to date. I think it's becoming harder every day to meet people organically. Like, we don't go for hobby classes anymore, like we don't go to the park for a walk. Like, where do you meet people? How do you meet people?
Right.
So I think dating apps definitely have changed the way we meet people, and we date people. um, I think it's exhausting for most people. It's very exhausting to be on a dating app, to swipe and then meet and then be disappointed. It's a very long and tedious cycle. Um, but it works. It works for a lot of people. I met my husband on Tinder. I know a lot of people who met their boyfriends or their spouses or girlfriends on dating apps. I think more than, or not more than, but other than serious relationships, dating apps have really opened up a whole new world of different kinds of dating and encounters, right? Uh, Casual sex, for instance, I don't think it was as acceptable as it is now. And that I believe is a result of accepting dating apps, right? Just meeting people. Sometimes you meet someone and there's no spark, but you become friends with them, right? At the end of the day, dating apps are essentially just an introduction platform. You know, you meet, you start talking, but then where it goes from there, it can go anywhere. So I think it is a very fascinating world. Every dating app is a different experience, from what I understand. So, like Bumble, for instance, you know, on Bumble, if you have a match, only the woman can initiate a conversation. The man cannot initiate a
Yeah.
conversation. So, I think it's a very fascinating world, and yeah.
But have Indian women? I mean, some of the younger girls that I speak to seem very good with the idea of casual sex. Okay, I don't know if that is something they're convincing themselves about, or is it actually happening? Is the urban Indian woman as okay or interested in casual sex as the urban Indian male?
Yes. And I think that's another myth that we need to debunk, is that women aren't interested in casual sex. I think they are, and why not? You know, I think women are more secretive about it, and
Hmm.
probably they
Because
don't
they'll
talk.
get judged. Because they'll be judged.
Yes, yes,
Right.
because they'll be judged and shamed, and a lot of times by other women, but also a lot of times by the men they date, right? So women are perhaps not as open about it, but they are definitely open to it.
Right. Um, Tanya, when a woman goes and files a police complaint, say after a date has gone wrong, yeah, a man has imposed himself on her in whatever way, um, or if it's sexual harassment at the workplace, even. What I want to know is that you know, the whole idea that these sort of things take years in court to to find a resolution. How quick is the process now after you've filed an FIR?
Um, it's, I don't want to sound like the, but it's not really. I mean, we're still at a place where it takes years for something to come through. Like once a case is filed, once you file an FIR, the police investigate and they need to file a charge sheet. That itself takes time. It
Hmm.
depends if it's a if there is someone well known in it, or
Hmm.
someone like a celebrity or someone famous, of course it the response is quicker, but otherwise it might take a while for even the charge sheet to be filed and for the case to go to court. And then once you go to the court, it's a different, all different story. It does take years. I mean, they did come up with fast track courts after the Nirbhaya case, but even then it's still a show where it takes at least good 4 to 5 years for the case to hear a final hearing. So I think that is something that also prevents women from going and filing a case, because it takes them so long to even get some sort of justice. And by the start to the end, so much happens in between, like files are lost, uh, the medical examination that's happened is not probably valid anymore. I mean, I can like talk about a lot of things that can go wrong. Witnesses switch sides. So because the process is so long, a lot of women feel like, I'm not going to get justice anyway. So why should I go through this trauma of going through a case? But then I just want to tell people that that's the only way around this. I mean, it's a fight for us, but that's the only way. I mean, we don't have a choice. Either we just let go and dismiss it, or if we want justice, if we want to, take some action against the person who's done something, we have to unfortunately go through the route of a
Sure.
long, delayed route. But yes, it could be fruitful at the end for you, and that's the only way out. So
It's really tragic that it has to be such a long, drawn-out process.
that's
I mean, it
anything.
will really discourage women from going to court. Nobody has that kind of time and bandwidth to pursue a matter and keep showing up at court for years at end. So I really hope that there can be sort of, the legal system can look into this and uh, at least shorten the process.
Yes, I mean, like I said, they did try. They did try to have fast track courts, but it doesn't really work out because I mean, I can talk about it for a long time, but I don't want to focus
Yeah.
on that right now because that's not the point. But yeah, so bureaucracy and then system is such that it does take a while for anything to come through. Yeah.
Prachi, this one is for you. After Me Too, a lot of men were called out, and they were eased out from their jobs. There was a fall from grace, a very public fall from grace, and of course, all of us rejoiced. Yeah, we celebrated the calling out of men who really, really deserved to be served their entitlement. However, in all this, there have also been a few cases where some people, some men, have become unemployable. Okay. I personally, there was a comedian who got called out, um, and he actually spoke to me a year later. He met me somewhere and he said that, "Do you have any kind of work for me? Even the most menial job I'm willing to take up because I have old parents to support and I've become unemployable." And uh, I reminded him why that had happened. And he said, yes, but it's that woman's word against mine, right? This had played out on Twitter. And so I as a human being often wondered about this, that when somebody has been an alleged sex offender, um, should that person be given a second chance in society? Or should they just be banished to some sort of Alcatraz for the rest of their lives in terms of social Alcatraz and professional?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer, honestly.
Now,
I
what do
think
most
that,
people think about it? When I ask you, because you're a psychologist and you speak to people. So, what is the general view on this? Is what I'm asking.
sure. So I just want to correct you on one thing. I don't practice anymore. I stopped practicing about 8 years ago.
I see.
And I'm a full-time writer now. But as a writer, I do talk to a lot of people about issues like this. So, but to answer your question, I think again, like really the views are very split. Some people are like death penalty, you should banish these men completely. But then there are people like you who are more empathetic towards it, right? And who also understand that uh, so much of it is just very gray areas, and what is the right price to pay? I think these questions are very difficult to answer. But I would say one thing is that I think that as a society, perhaps we need to think about reforms and rehabilitation instead of, very extreme this or that, like banishing or, ignoring the fact that this person is a sex offender and just, brushing it under the rug. I think it
No, and
has
I'm
to.
sorry to interject. I'm even talking about. Uh, I'm not talking about rape at all or molestation. I'm just talking about a lot of the small, suicide, small, supposedly smaller crimes that take place. Yeah, that uh, outrage of woman's modesty. Forwarding naked pictures of a woman, for instance.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm saying that, I mean, as a society, if, like you said, if there is no reform, then we are probably just going to raise more criminals of a certain kind.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so I think that's really the most important thing is to think about reform and think about education and spreading awareness, because a lot of these smaller crimes and even rape, even something like rape and murder, it all, going back to a conversation earlier, it all stems from the same thing, which is not seeing women as whole beings with their own agency, right? And on the other side, the man box, or how we elevate men or raise men to be entitled,
Yeah.
so it all comes from the same thing. And I think really the answer and perhaps the long term solution and the only thing that can really truly bring about change is conversation. We need to talk about these things. We need to talk about these things with each other, include the men in the conversation. It cannot be just women talking about it with each other. I don't I yeah I that's how I would answer this question. I think we need to start thinking about education, awareness, and reform.
I think I have time just for one last question, which is at the right at the end of your book. I'm sure women would want to know this answer, which is to say that why do men hurt the women they love? Why do they do it, Prachi?
Because men are confused. I think all of us hurt the people we love. Uh, and men just sometimes don't know it or don't want to know it. So, yeah, that's what it is. I think if you want to know the answer, read the book.
Oh, you've also written about chivalry versus chauvinism, right? I think that actually there is no blurred line between them. They're two very different things. But I see a lot of my men friends say that, oh, she expects me to get the door for her, pull the chair out for her, and then she says she's a feminist. And I'm just tired of explaining to them that good manners have nothing to do with not wanting equality, and you're not taking away my agency if you pull a chair out for me. You find that men are confused about this?
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of men are confused about this. And because of this confusion, some men have stopped showing kindness and courtesy, you know? Um, Definitely. I think so. So there is a lot of confusion, and Tanya also brought this up very rightly so that there is a lot of confusion. I think women have more clarity about how they want gender roles to change for them, how we want womanhood and femininity to change
Yeah,
for us, but men don't have that clarity simply because we haven't had those conversations, or they haven't had those conversations.
right. So I'm just going to urge men to please buy a copy of your book and go over it and take down notes, because it might just serve them better in life moving forward. Because right now, as you've written, and rightly so, lust has been replaced by fear, right? So I think it's time they dealt with it and sorted it out. So I think we should wind it up on that note.
Thank you, Shunali. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shunali.